Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Peter Baker back with us today. We'll chat with Peter in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. All right, let's get into the big things of the week. Let's start with the government shutdown. Republicans are blaming Democrats. Democrats are blaming Republicans. Republicans are claiming that Democrats need to just do their job. I don't know. My thinking is that they're actually doing their job, right? I mean, I send, and Democrats at home send their elected leaders to Washington to vote their interests, right? That's what their job is. Their job is not to rubber stamp literally everything that's presented to them by the Republican Party, especially if they didn't even have any input in a particular bill, in this case, a spending measure. So they actually are doing their jobs. And the House is not even in session. Speaker Mike Johnson has kept his caucus away because of two things. We had a special election in Arizona. Adelita Grijalva won, and she needs to be sworn in. And so if Johnson brings his caucus back to the chamber, that's one of the first orders of business, is to swear her in. He doesn't want to do that because that narrows even more the already razor-thin majority that the Republicans have in the House. But even more so, it would give Democrats the needed 218 votes to force a floor vote to release the full Epstein files. So let's just get something straight here, folks. Our government has been shut down because the Republicans don't want to release the Epstein files. They would rather see tens of thousands of employees furloughed and even more terminated, which is what the government and Trump is threatening. They want to see chaos and hardship across the country. They want our military to not get paid. They want air traffic controllers not to get paid. They want to create all this financial hardship for the working and middle class just so they don't have to vote on releasing the Epstein files. For how long did Trump say, hey, just elect us and we'll fix all that shit that Democrats broke, right? Just put us back in charge. Give us the White House. Give us the House. Give us the Senate. Let us control everything. And then we will release those Epstein files, which obviously there's such a gigantic cover-up here that rivals perhaps any in history. But you give them all this control, and what are they doing now? They're proving they can't govern. Why? Because they're using the same excuse. So before it was, put us in power, and we'll fix all this shit that the Democrats are breaking. And now it's, you gave us all this power, and we're helpless. Because the Democrats are still so big, bad, and scary that they're still doing all this bad shit, even though we control everything and we can't do anything about it, and it's their shutdown. It's the Schumer shutdown. Now, that doesn't make any sense, does it, MAGA? Because they control everything, and voters aren't buying it. Because a slew of polls have been released this week from the Washington Post, Marist College, New York Times, and others. Voters are blaming Republicans overwhelmingly for this shutdown. Washington Post by 17 points. Marist by 12 points. New York Times by 7 points. Because voters are not buying the bullshit. And what it really boils down to is the Democrats are fighting for the working class. They're fighting for the middle class. They're fighting for health care. That is the thing that is driving Democrats' refusal to vote. And again, I just want to stress, there is no Democrat shutdown. Democrats said, hey, you guys are in charge. That's fine. That's cool. Elections have consequences. And you know what? You didn't ask us what we want in this bill, or you don't care what we want taken out of the bill. That's fine too, because you're in charge. But here's the problem, Republicans. You can't pass this bill without our votes. And like I said before, their job is to vote the interests of their constituencies. Their job is not to vote what Donald Trump wants. Their job is not to vote for what Senate Majority Leader John Thune wants. Their job is not to vote for what Speaker of the House Mike Johnson wants. And their job is not to vote for what the Republican folks at home want. Their job is to vote for what I want and what my fellow Democrats who voted for them want. So they didn't vote for it. Explain to me how that's a Democrat shutdown. You want to avoid a shutdown? Go back to the drawing board and put some Democrat shit in there. Negotiate. And then guess what? You'll have some Democrat votes. And we would have avoided a shutdown. But with this health care issue, it's about expiring subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, ACA, Obamacare, which are going to expire at the end of December, but the insurance companies are making their plans now. So people are going to find that over the next several weeks and next couple of months, that their premiums are going to explode as much as 100% or more. And then also what the Democrats are fighting for is to correct what the Republicans put in their big ugly ass bill in terms of Medicaid cuts, massive Medicaid cuts that take effect in December of 26. Interestingly, after the midterm elections, because they know how fucked up it is and they don't want voters to have an opportunity to voice their anger at the polls. Now, healthcare has been a winning fight for Democrats. They ran on healthcare almost exclusively in 2017. They picked up 40 seats in the House and flipped the chamber. Half of the ads in that campaign were on healthcare. And so they're looking at the midterms next year. But Republicans don't see it this way. Let's play this clip from J.D. Vance.
They have done instead is to shut down the government because we won't give billions of dollars to healthcare funding for illegal aliens. That's a ridiculous proposition.
And that is a ridiculous statement. It is pure, unadulterated bullshit. But this is what Republicans are very good at doing. They lie. What do you guys think about what's going on this week?
Liars, liars, pants on fire. It's disgusting, and it gives Russ Vought the opportunity to follow through with his plan. And, you know, it's all going according to plan, Andy.
And Trump actually just mentioned Project 2025 in a truth.
Yes, wasn't that truthful?
Extremely truthful.
He was actually truthful.
On occasion, he says what he believes.
But the problem with that is, what?
You mean the fact that he never heard of 2025 like 6 months ago?
Yeah.
He never heard of it.
He never heard of it.
Never heard of this crazy thing. But I think that the bigger picture is that what the shutdown points to is that the parties really differ fundamentally on what they believe government is. And the party of Trump, which I don't even want to call the Republican Party anymore because they've left the room, they believe social programs are simply handouts to poor people that enable dependency. And the Democrats, of course, maintain that strong governmental institutions are indispensable for a democratic society. And those two diverging views are fundamental to see why this shutdown is something that Trump is perfectly happy with, and his whole party is, even though they're full of shit saying it's something they want to stop. And the Democrats are actually fighting for people's health care.
So do you think the Democrats have the stomach for this? I mean, you make an excellent point.
Well, I think there's a major problem here. I don't know how you negotiate with somebody who can change the rules after you signed the contract.
Well, even more so. So the Republicans are saying, this is just a clean bill. All it does is extend, the spending from last. It just, there's nothing in it. There's no pork. There's nothing partisan, blah, blah, blah. And then let's spend the next 7 weeks negotiating health care and all the other things in the military. And to your point, the Democrats are like, you fuckers ain't going to come back to the table if we give you what you want now. Are you out of your minds?
But there's no way. The problem is that
they won't even get to the contract stage.
In this hypothetical situation, let's just say the Republicans had a change of heart and they sit down and say, okay, we're going to rescind some of this. We're going to fund Medicaid. And then the Democrats sign what? They're going to renege. He's taking away everything Congress approved already.
Yeah.
Russ Vought will simply say, oh, we didn't agree to that. Not in the White House.
Right. And this is the problem globally too with our foreign affairs. We have partners overseas that are like, we can't trust you. You say one thing and then you do another. But, what's happening with this shutdown, and the reason why that J.D. Vance clip is so important, is that we have gotten to a place in this country where Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and the Republican Party are literally blaming every bad thing on black and brown people, on immigrants. I can't believe how much power undocumented immigrants have. They are responsible for every problem in this country, according to Republicans. But the Democrats are winning the messaging here. They are. The polling shows that. And it's because of everything we're talking about. You think the people at home, especially independents and moderate Republicans, you think they're sitting there thinking this administration, this president is serious? He's on a fucking toilet in the middle of the night tweeting out videos with Russ Vought as the Grim Reaper. Like, this is a president during a government shutdown? Is there any wonder why voters are blaming the Republican Party?
He likes the fight. He's really good at it. It feeds him.
It's the only thing that feeds him.
Right? So does it matter right now that the Republicans look foolish and inept?
Yes, because there is going to be a midterm election. Folks out there, I got to tell you, stop telling yourself we're not going to have an election. We are going to have an election. It is going to be free and fair. And even if on some level it isn't, it is going to be such a fucking blue wave that it won't matter. It won't matter. So just focus like they are. Why do you think all of this is happening? Do you think they're distracting? Do you think they're trying to stop mail-in voting? Do you think they're doing everything they're doing because they feel confident about the midterms? They know there's an election coming.
Yeah, it's their last gasp.
Focus on that. There is an election coming, and they are scared shitless. And to your question, Jen, that's where it's going to matter. And they know it. Because if the Democrats take the House, forget about the Senate, which may or may not be in play, depending on who you talk to. I've heard very astute political operatives who said, hey, 6 months ago, I would have said you're crazy. Today, not so crazy. But even if they take just the House, that changes everything. There's a check. There is a check. And they know that. So that's everybody has to focus on that. If there's anybody out there who's throwing in the towel and like, it doesn't matter, we're going to it's not going to be a free and fair. You got to stay focused. You got to stay energized. You got to stay inspired. And you got to do everything humanly possible to help candidates win on the congressional level, on the state and local level, school board level. You got to volunteer. You got to canvass. You got to make phone calls, sign postcards, donate money, give money to lawyers fighting in court. Do whatever you can. We have so many things we can do. The thing you don't want to do is throw in the towel. But back to messaging. Bernie Sanders and AOC, my two heroes right now. Mm-hmm. And I say that as a moderate Democrat. But the two of them are out there right now with a new video. And they are the explainers in chief. They have brought it down to the essence of what this is about. Let's play that clip. It's a little long, folks. It's a couple of minutes, but it really is incredibly important.
Hey, everybody. I was walking here in Washington, D.C., and who did I bump into? One of my favorite members of the United States Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
One of my favorite senators.
All right. Anyhow, as everybody knows, we are now in a government shutdown. Republicans are attacking Alexandria, attacking me. Why didn't you vote for this clean CR to keep the government open?
Well, there's nothing clean about it. This is one of the dirtiest tricks that is being pulled on the American people right now. Starting today, October 1st, and throughout the rest of the month, Americans across this country are going to start getting notifications that their insurance premiums are up to doubling. We're talking about...
Say that again.
Your monthly insurance premiums are going to double for millions of people across the country.
At a time when we are already paying, by far, the highest prices in the world for health care, at a time when people can't afford it right now. So what happens?
That means people getting bankrupt over chemotherapy, people going to the pharmacy and not being able to get their insulin. And frankly, it means a lot of Americans are going to be in danger. And Republicans want us to rubber stamp that. So what are we going to say to that, Bernie?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not only be in danger. Let's be clear. And doesn't make me happy to have to say this. But there have been studies out there that when you combine doubling premiums for the ACA and then throwing 15 million people off of Medicaid and the ACA, the result is, according to studies at Yale and the University of Pennsylvania, 50,000 low-income, working-class Americans will die every See, all right? If you don't have the money to go to a doctor and you're sick, you die. And that's what that's what this clean bill is about.
And so Republicans want us to rubber stamp that. And we're saying no. We need to stand up for the American people. We need to stand up for our healthcare system. And if they want our votes, they need to make sure that we're protecting every American and making sure that we can do what we can to continue to make healthcare accessible, affordable, as we work to make it a human right for all.
Right. So let me just back that up. Remember, right now, our healthcare system is broken. Right now, we're the only major country on earth not to guarantee healthcare to all people. And these guys want to make it even worse. We're not going to let that happen.
No, we're not.
Thank you.
Onward.
It's great. Very simple. This shutdown is about you getting or not getting your insulin shot.
Very clear. Yep.
Very clear. Donald Trump is trying to use the shutdown to stop funding very important things in Democrat states, right? Things like infrastructure projects. So in New York, he's targeted New York, for example, with the Hudson River Tunnel project and also the 2nd Avenue Subway project. He also cut off critical funding for policing and for counterterrorism efforts in New York.
The city that he loves.
The city that he loves and the city that loves him.
Well, we've never had a terrorist act in New York City.
No, we don't do it. But here's the problem with that for Republicans. Does anyone remember how the House flipped last November? Where it really happened?
New York State.
New York State. Maybe that's why Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican of New York State, is not happy.
Soon to be former congressman.
with what Trump is doing. Because he knows. And Trump, in his sociopathy, fails to realize that in punishing Democrat states, there are also a lot of Republicans living in those states who are going to be hurt by these policies. Independent people, moderate Republican voters. Someone needs to remind him that it was New York State that flipped the House for the GOP. Again, Jen, getting back to your original question, that's how they're going to learn that this is not only not how government works, but it's just stupid politics.
Short-term gain. We'll see.
All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, Robert Reich's prediction that air traffic controllers will end the shutdown and Republicans will be blamed for the fiasco. My loser, our president's declaration that the U.S. is in a formal armed conflict with the drug cartels the administration has labeled terrorist organizations, giving the president extraordinary wartime powers to conduct raids like we saw in Chicago and hurt Democrats and their constituents during the government shutdown.
My winner is Erin Chemerinsky, who is the dean of the School of Law at UC Berkeley, for calling out Trump's proposed compact with universities for what it is, extortion, plain and simple. My loser this week is the Anti-Defamation League, formerly one of the most prominent Jewish advocacy and anti-hate organizations in the world. They have removed all of the pages on extremism research that they have done 3,000 pages of because they were called out by Kash Patel and Elon Musk for listing Turning Points USA in their database.
My winner, Pope Leo, who bravely called out the hypocrisy of conservatives' claims of being pro-life. He said, quote, "Someone who says I'm against abortion but says I'm in favor of the death penalty is not really pro-life. Someone who says that I'm against abortion but I'm in agreement with the inhumane treatment of immigrants in the United States. I don't know if that's pro-life. Good for him. My loser has nothing to do with politics. It's the New York Mets, who were 21 games above 500 on June 12th and whose season ended Sunday in one of the greatest collapses in Major League Baseball history, almost as bad as their 2007 historic collapse. All right, that gets us to the weekly rant. So in the wake of the shutdown, and as a purely punitive measure designed to strong-arm Chuck Schumer into capitulation, Trump has frozen about $18 billion for infrastructure projects in New York City to ensure that taxpayer money isn't, quote, flowing based on unconstitutional DEI principles. This funding has already been appropriated by Congress, which basically makes this an illegal move. Additionally, Trump and his Department of Homeland Security is trying to ban several Democrat states from critical funding for anti-terrorism programs as punishment for not agreeing to his inhumane anti-immigrant policies. 11 states have sued the administration this week after it defied a court order from last week, which found the politically motivated ban illegal. This is what Trump and Republicans do very, very well. They don't govern. They don't actually do anything. They don't pass laws. They've done absolutely nothing to help Americans, especially the working and middle classes. Have they improved the economy? No. Have they lowered inflation? No. Inflation's going up. Have they created new jobs? No. Jobs are cratering. Have they improved education? No. Healthcare? No. Have they made our children and every one of us safer from gun violence? No. They've done shit to improve our way of life because all they know how to do is break shit, cut and cancel shit, destroy shit. That's what Flood the Zone really is. It's just a distraction from the bigger issues Americans face, the issues that this administration and this president can't and won't fix. The daily struggles that voters endure are not a priority to this administration. And these things are just distractions from Trump's Epstein existential crisis. A shitstorm, by the way, which refuses to go away. They're very good at walking into a glass and china shop with a baseball bat and smashing everything to pieces. But you know what? A 5-year-old can do that. What they're not good at is how to build anything that actually benefits us. Trump is not making America great. He's just making it ugly, dark, dangerous, and broken. So the distractions will continue to come. They'll keep coming so fast and furious that we can't remember which ones came the week before. Because Trump is desperately trying to make MAGA forget that there's likely either a disgusting pedophile in the Oval Office or a president who's protecting his vile criminal pals who've committed these unthinkable crimes. All right, let's get to Peter Baker. He is the Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times and a political analyst for MSNBC. He has covered the last 5 presidents for the New York Times and the Washington Post. And at the Post, he also served as Moscow co-bureau chief and covered the opening months of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He is the author of 7 books, including the best-selling The Divider, Trump in the White House, 2017 to 2021, and The Man Who Ran Washington, The Life and Times of James A. Baker III, both with his wife, Susan Glasser, of The New Yorker. And he is a frequent panelist on Washington Week on PBS. Peter, welcome back into the back room.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So let's talk about the big news of the week, the shutdown. How long do you think this is going to last? What, if anything, are you hearing when and if negotiations, real negotiations between both parties and Trump may happen, or are both sides just completely entrenched?
Yeah, I think both sides are fairly entrenched. They have the incentives on both sides to keep it going for a while. Trump doesn't want to give in to Democrats, doesn't want to work with Democrats, believes that this gives him an opportunity to further deconstruct the government while, in theory, it's shut down. On the other side, the Democrats are very anxious to show that they're willing to fight. They got in trouble. Leadership did. Schumer did earlier in the spring when he did go along with a spending resolution to keep the government going, and got a lot of blowback from the left. And this time, I think he's willing to make more of a fight out of it. And I think that they feel like that the healthcare issue, which is what they're insisting be in any spending bill, is a winner for them. It worked for them in the 2018 midterms, they believe, and they hope that it will be an important one going forward for them.
Yeah, well, in view of what you said about Schumer back in March, I believe it was, it's really hard to imagine a scenario where he and Hakeem Jeffries would throw in the towel anytime soon without getting anything substantive in return, and particularly with healthcare. That would be very bad for him. But more so also, Democrats at home who've been demanding, as you've alluded to, more fight from the party, they grow even more dissatisfied with leadership. So it just seems like Schumer and Jeffries are really in a tough spot.
I think the recipe is there for, a possibly long-lasting shutdown for that reason. Because, in fact, I mean, look, in modern Washington, the word compromise is considered to be a dirty word just to begin with, right? If you're compromising, it means you're sacrificing principles. And there's the political reward structure has changed. It used to be that some sort of compromise was seen as a good thing by constituents and by members of the elected body, because they would have to go home to a district where they would appeal to people outside of their base. Today, of course, if you're a member of Congress, you're really focused more on your base than anything else. And your base wants a fight. It wants you to stand up, as it believes, for principle. Definitely there's a big strain of thought on the left that the Democratic leadership has been too willing to cave in to Trump. And so I think you're right. They are in bad position. It's hard to see how they can get a compromise that they can sell to their own constituents and that Trump would agree to.
Yeah. But, and the interesting thing is everybody's talking about messaging. All the polls that came out this week show that Americans pretty overwhelmingly are blaming Republicans for the shutdown. And even more so, about 3/4 of Americans want the ACA subsidies to be extended, which is at the heart of the Democrats' fight. So it seems Democrats are winning the message war, right?
Well, that was what the polls show. You're right about that. And I think that's, to some extent, that's baked in, right? I mean, Republicans are seen just generally as the party that doesn't like government, and Democrats are seen as the party that does like government. So I think the assumption on the part of a lot of Americans who might not follow the ins and outs of it are that if the government is shut down, it's because Republicans don't like it and don't want it to be open, and Democrats do, and therefore they give Democrats the benefit of the doubt when it comes to issues like a spending shutdown. But that doesn't mean it would necessarily last, and that's the problem, of course. You never know how these things play out over time. Often the initial impression the public has, shifts as they get tired, perhaps, of a government that's not servicing them in the way they ought to be serviced. There are a lot of people out there who are out of work right now as a result of this. Federal employees who are not being paid. And so we'll see how it lasts. But you're right. I think in the initial surveying anyway, it does show that the Democrats are on the more popular side.
It's interesting. This morning, CNN showed some polling that, and I didn't know this, but with pretty much every other shutdown in the last couple of decades, Republicans have been blamed.
Yeah.
But to your point, they also showed some stats for where are the numbers when the shutdowns ended, and it stayed with Republicans as those at fault. But you're right. Today, conventional wisdom goes out the window, of course, and anything can happen, especially with Trump and this Republican Party. But it is interesting when you look at it from a historical perspective.
Yeah, again, I think it's partly just baked into the identities of these two parties, right? But it's also true that the last big shutdown during Trump's first term, which lasted 35 days, the longest in history, and was seen as a huge moment of confrontation here in Washington, ultimately turned out not to be a big factor in the next election, right? Because so many other things happened after that, including, most importantly, COVID. And so, we don't know whether this shutdown will ultimately have, in terms of politics anyway, a long-lasting impact or not. But it certainly, I think, from the Democrats' point of view, is important to galvanize their side, to feel like they are standing up and fighting after 8 months of basically taking it on the chin. And there's a lot of people, who could suffer as a result of the health care subsidies going away. So putting aside the politics of it, which may be crass, the policy implications are significant for millions of people who seem, who are on the edge of losing the help that they got during the COVID period for affording health care. And it may put a lot of them, off of, health insurance because they can't afford it anymore. So it's both important politically, but also, of course, on behalf of people who are at stake.
Yeah, and also this week we've seen the offensive and what Hakeem Jeffries called racist posts with him in a sombrero. Late last night, Trump posted this bizarre, tone-deaf video with OMB Director Russ Vought as the Grim Reaper. Trump himself has said the shutdown could be like a good thing because he gets to fire a lot of people and shut programs and all that. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of compassion or seriousness here. And it reminds us in a big way of the chaos and heartlessness of the Musk Doge period early this year. So maybe this is why Americans are blaming Republicans?
Yeah, look, I mean, Russ Vought has said it out loud. He has said he wants, he said this a while back, not directly in context of this shutdown, but in general, he says he wants federal workers to be in trauma. I mean, the idea is not just that we want to make government smaller and more efficient, which a lot of people might agree with, is that he wants to deconstruct the deep state and punish, in effect, those he sees as, part of it. It's not enough that people might have to lose their jobs. He wants them to suffer. He has said that. That's not somebody making it up. That's his own. Those are his own words. And I think that you're right in that sense. It doesn't come across to people who don't subscribe to that political philosophy as a thought through, considered approach to governance. I mean, you're right. These memes, these sombrero messaging.
It's like the chainsaw moment all over again. Like they didn't learn from that.
So bizarre. No president has ever done anything like this. It doesn't seem presidential right now. Not being presidential has worked for Trump, right? We all thought, well, nobody could get away with this, that, or the other thing.
It certainly lends credence to when folks say things like it's all about the cruelty, because it just consistently seems to be about they're enjoying, to your point, this suffering of people, which is so bizarre.
Even before the shutdown, I think Donald Trump in the last few weeks defined his domestic policy very succinctly in basically a sentence or so at the Charlie Kirk funeral. He says, "I hate my opponents and I don't wish them well." That's not a presidential message. I'm not saying that other presidents haven't also hated their opponents. They mostly probably did on some level or another, but they didn't give voice to it. They recognize that as a president, you have sort of a larger, higher responsibility to at least give lip service to the idea of being president for all the people and not looking to exact cruelty and so forth. But that's not something that Trump subscribes to, and it doesn't concern him that it looks cool, as you say. It may be in fact part of the point.
Yeah, I think the Trump is not presidential train left the station about 9 years ago.
Yeah. One of these things is not like the other, although that old show has probably been canceled by now.
Are all these threatened terminations during the shutdown even legal, especially as the expenditures have already been appropriated by Congress?
Well, there's an argument about that. In fact, our friends at the Washington Post had a good story about the lawyers urging the administration not to engage in widespread layoffs during the shutdown, because in fact, when you lay people off, in many cases, you have to give them severance, and that's an obligation of spending, and they are not given permission at the moment to make obligations of spending because the government is supposed to be shut down, and Congress hasn't given them that permission. But what we've seen, of course, is an administration that doesn't respect the Congress's power of the purse. It's been willing to accrue to itself all kinds of authority to do things that Congress hasn't authorized. And, so far it's had some success at winning in the courts. And I think that their view of this is try everything and get as far as you can and go as far as the courts will let you go and see if you can't push the envelope there. But it really is a drastic and significant shift in the separation of powers. And it goes back, of course, to the Nixon days, but it's really an important moment, and the shutdown is exacerbating and accelerating it.
And also, are there a Hatch Act and or other violations occurring when the administration uses taxpayer money to blame Democrats for the shutdown on websites and on their out-of-office emails?
Yeah, again, we overuse the word unprecedented, but I don't remember any time when the government websites, government messaging, which is supposed to be, apolitical, nonpartisan. These government agencies represent all Americans. They're not supposed to be, an adjunct of the RNC or the DNC. And yet, you're right, they're using them to put out a very partisan message. Now, lawyers tell us that is potentially a violation of the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act is meant to keep partisan politics, out of government. But we've seen with this president going back 10 years now that he doesn't really care for Hatch Act violations. And every time it's been brought up to him, he's basically ignored it, pushed it off. And there doesn't seem to be an enforcement mechanism that anybody can impose on him in that regard.
Well, this is a great segue into the next subject I want to ask you about, which is what you wrote about earlier this week in your New York Times piece titled, "In Going After Foes, Trump Sets a Precedent That Could Haunt His Allies." To me, it's essentially a what goes around comes around story. So why don't you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a reason why in government we accept limits on power when it's our turn in power, because there's going to be a time when we're not in power. And we don't want the other side to do to us, what we might want to do to them, right? And this goes back 250 years. This is at the heart of our system, that people in power do not have absolute power. And yet we have with Trump an example of a president who is claiming all sorts of powers to both prosecute his enemies now, what looks like to be very partisan, Justice Department, and to go after free speech, not just speech that instigates violence or somehow defamatory, but actually speech that he just doesn't like because it's critical of him, and to seize the kind of power we're talking about over appropriations and take it away from the Congress. Well, there's going to come a day, at least we presume, in which he's not going to be in power and his people aren't going to be in power. And the question will then be, have you set a precedent for the other side to do things to you that you would have objected to had it not been for what you've done now to set that standard, to establish a new standard. You hear conservatives talk about this. Tucker Carlson says, look, free speech is free speech. When they say hate speech, it's just, it can be used as an excuse to come after us as well. So be cautious of that. You heard Ted Cruz say that the FCC chairman, Brandon Carr, sounded like a mafioso in trying to pressure ABC to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air, because Ted Cruz understands that if a Trump FCC can push broadcasters to take off people they don't like, that a Biden or some other Democratic FCC then would have the natural precedent to say, well, okay, then let's say Fox shouldn't have X or Y on the air. And so you're right, what goes around comes around, but there doesn't seem to be a thought at this point for the precedent is setting for after they leave office.
In the piece, you suggest that someone like FBI Director Kash Patel in particular should be concerned with this new precedent.
Well, look, Kash Patel's FBI and the Justice Department, the Justice Department through Pam Bondi had just charged a former FBI director, James Comey, with lying to Congress, okay? That's a case that the career prosecutors thought didn't hold up, wasn't a case to be made, and Trump basically ordered them to ignore the career prosecutors and go ahead and file the charges anyway, which is, again, something I can't remember ever seeing since covering the White House going back to 1996, in which a president directly orders, or at least gives the impression of an order, to the Justice Department to prosecute an individual enemy over the objections of the career lawyers who say there's no case there. So Kash Patel at this point has already been accused by Democrats like Dick Blumenthal, the senator from Connecticut, of lying to Congress himself, because he said during his confirmation hearings that he wouldn't politicize the FBI. And the Democrats say that's exactly what he's done. And therefore, why isn't that a lie that a future Kash Patel successor could say, well, that amounts to a crime as well? I'm not saying it is a crime. I'm not saying anybody would actually charge him. I'm just saying that, again, in this what goes around comes around theory of the case, he's now being accused in effect of some of basically the same thing he and his team and the Justice Department are accusing one of his predecessors of doing.
Yeah. For years, we've always heard, you got to be careful when it's a Democrat's turn, blah, blah, blah. And then there'd be people say, but Democrats are never going to do this stuff. They're just not wired that way. They don't want to lie. They want to be above the fray. They're better than them, all that stuff. But something interesting is happening in this country. We see it in New York with Zoran Mamdani. You see AOC. You see people like Eric Swalwell and perhaps Jake Auchincloss and Jason Crow, others like that. There's a younger, new breed of Democrats who it's not that hard to believe that if they became in power, or if there was a president AOC, the point of your piece should be very well taken, and these people should be very concerned, because I don't think they're not the Dick Durbins and Chuck Schumers. They will exact retribution or whatever, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not saying that the Democrats would necessarily do the exact same thing that Trump has done or gone as far as he has gone. Certainly they have argued that he has abused power, so then to do the same things from the left that he has done from the right would expose them to charges of being hypocrites. Having said that, it doesn't mean that even if they don't go as far as Trump has gone, even if they take the precedent of it from what they think is a good government point of view, and you're a conservative, look at what you've done, right? What would a President AOC think about Defense Department spending that she thinks is wasteful and better targeted for schools or healthcare or whatever? Could she then take the precedent that Trump has set and say, well, I'm not going to do what Congress said. I'm not going to buy that weapon system that Congress said we ought to buy, because I think I can use that money in a better way. So it's even in the most, good government argument kind of way, it sets precedents that future governments can use, even if they don't go as far or as as expansively as Trump has. Conservatives, the point that conservatives are making is, we could be on the receiving end of this stuff.
Yeah, well, to your point earlier about Ted Cruz, who you cite in the piece, he was one of the lone Republican voices to strongly rebuke the administration's attack on Jimmy Kimmel and free speech. He said, quote, "They will use this power and they will use it ruthlessly, and that is dangerous." He's a pretty calculating, crafty politician. Does he know something his colleagues either don't know or are refusing to accept?
Well, he's willing to say what they probably do know, right? I mean, he did say that. He's not often a critic of Trump these days, but he has also not been Trump's best friend. And he sees the future. He sees a future after Trump and is obviously thinking about what that could mean for them. I just think that, from the Republican point of view, they look at what happened during Biden when the Biden administration contacted these social media companies and said, look, you're putting all this disinformation about COVID or whatever online, and maybe you ought to think about that. They took that to be an example of government censorship. They filed lawsuits against it. They went all the way to the Supreme Court to make that argument that constituted the kind of censorship the government shouldn't do. Now, the administration says, look, we're just trying to combat disinformation. But one party's disinformation is the next party's, free speech. And this is the complicated, murky ground that we're in. And so I think a Ted Cruz looks at that and says, well, we complained about what they were doing, social media companies. If we end up doing even more so with ABC and CBS, the lawsuit that Trump filed against CBS that then, had the advantage of the FCC pressure over the merger. I mean, all these things, opened the door that another president someday down the road could use.
Mm-hmm. The Supreme Court in July of last year gave Trump near absolute immunity. He's been acting this year as if he's truly above the law. For all intents and purposes, is he above the law right now?
I mean, it certainly sent the message, right? I mean, they say, what they said was that you have immunity for clearly official actions. And even on things that are sort of debatable about whether they're official, there's at least a presumption of some sort of immunity, and any prosecutor would have to make the argument that that didn't count as an official action. Well, Trump certainly is acting as if he feels quite, liberated to do what he wants. He says he has the power to do what he wants. And it is a question of where the accountability is in the system right now. We saw in Trump 1.0 that impeachment, frankly, clearly is not a viable method of constitutional accountability anymore. As long as your party has 34 votes in the Senate, which is enough to block a 2/3 vote for conviction, then you're not going to be thrown out of office. And these days, the parties are so polarized, it's pretty hard to imagine the party of any president, but particularly Trump, breaking with him enough to convict him in an impeachment trial. Okay, so impeachment as a measure of accountability seems to be pointless at this point. Clearly, he's not deterred by it. He feels like he survived 2 impeachments, so therefore, what the heck? Go ahead, feel free. And so where is the matter of accountability? If you have Republicans in the Congress willing to cede their power in effect because they're not objecting to his accrual of power to himself, it's hard to see where he is, where he faces accountability. We'll see what the Supreme Court does on some of these other cases. But so far, they've been relatively supportive of a lot of the things he's done. And so he's had a clear path for 8 months.
Yeah. Your piece is really about weaponization of the Department of Justice, the FBI. Trump ran last year on accusations of Biden and Democrats' weaponization of the Justice Department and promised to end the abuse of power. But in executing his retribution campaign, he's, in essence, turned the DOJ into his personal law firm and the FBI and ICE into his personal security team. So his weaponization, it's truly staggering in scope and scale, right? I mean, especially if you throw that unprecedented word around again.
Yeah. Well, and it's worth remembering, by the way, that this is what he wanted to do and try to do in his first term, right? In his first term, he regularly called for his political opponents to be prosecuted. He regularly badgered and pressured his Justice Department to do that. He just happened to have a couple of attorney generals who refused, right? That whatever you think of Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr, at the end of the day, on a lot of the stuff that Trump wanted them to do, they wouldn't go along. Now he's got a different team there that is willing to go along. Now, they say, well, Biden did this first. Well, first of all, they're very different on the facts, and I think it's a much more complicated situation. Did the Democrats make a mistake in prosecuting Trump? There are some Democrats who would say they did because it would open up this argument. But it's worth remembering that Biden, as far as we can tell, never gave any direction to the Justice Department about what to do. He didn't even control the 2 state prosecutions in Georgia and New York. Biden did not sign executive orders targeting individual enemies of his, saying they should be investigated. He didn't fire or push out a U.S. attorney because the U.S. attorney wouldn't prosecute an opponent of his. He didn't use the FCC to leverage what ends up being a $16 million payoff by CBS for a presidential library on a suit that most lawyers thought was pretty bogus. He didn't fire, scores and scores of FBI agents and career prosecutors simply because they did the job that they were assigned to do and prosecute, in this case, the January 6th rioters or otherwise participate in investigations that the president didn't like. I read in the paper just today that they fired a career FBI trainee because he had a pride flag on his desk during the Biden administration. I mean, there's a willingness to use power to go after people in the Trump 2.0 that doesn't come anywhere close to something we saw under previous presidents.
And you also cited in your piece, to just sort of riff on what you were saying a minute ago, look at the indictments that came down in the Biden Justice Department, including his own son, right? So you have a Democrat mayor of New York City. You had this Democrat Senator Menendez in Jersey. And it's really hard to say that the Biden administration weaponized the Justice Department with any real credibility. But as a contrast, Trump has been pretty ruthless in how he's sought to punish his enemies, but it just seems even worse than anyone could have predicted, right? I mean, you knew some things were coming, but look at what he's been doing, especially with law firms and universities. Like, I don't think a lot of people saw some of this stuff coming,
I think people, look, he was fairly open about this in some ways. He did use the word retribution. I am your retribution. I will be about, his second term would be about retribution, he said during the campaign. At one point, he said he was for termination of the Constitution. Termination, that was his word, of the Constitution.
Oh, he's just kidding.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? I think a lot of people took what he said as bluster and, bloviating and so forth and thought, well, he didn't really do some of this stuff in his first term. He said lock her up at all those rallies in 2016, but he didn't lock up Hillary Clinton in the end. And so, don't get too worried or don't get don't take it too seriously. And the lesson is, in fact, that he is serious about this stuff. And the difference this time is that he knows what he's doing and how to do it and surrounded by people who are willing to do it with him. Yeah. Right. The first term, he came into office as the only president in our history who had never spent a day in public office in the military. So he didn't know how it worked. And he surrounded himself with, in many cases, some conventional Republicans and military officers and people who had experience and believed in the institutions and didn't go along with some of the more extreme things he wanted to do at the time. And so I think people came away from the first term with a misimpression that he didn't really mean this stuff. I think he's now made clear he did mean it.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about Comey, because this is obviously an extraordinary escalation in Trump's effort to punish and prosecute his political enemies. People are saying, we've crossed our Rubicon here. But with Trump, we seem to cross Rubicons every week. But I do think we're at some kind of an inflection point where either we're going to go off to this side, in a very terrible way, or somehow the reins get pulled in on him because of what he just did. And, a lot of legal experts think this will get thrown out, maybe even on a motion to dismiss. So it does seem like we're at a very pivotal point here.
Well, the interesting thing, by the way, and I'm not a lawyer, but the interesting thing is if you actually really want Jim Comey to go to prison, then he's gone about it in exactly the way that won't result in that, because he has given Comey's defense a really giant argument to make, which is that this is political.
Yeah.
And how are they going to prove that in court? They're going to quote the president of the United States and show his actions. I don't know how, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what's allowed and not allowed. But I got to imagine you want to call to the stand, if you get this far in a case, the people who said, no, I'm not going to prosecute this because I don't think it's a case, right? And the way it has come out, so political, it would not surprise me if that they have a hard time making the case stick because a judge will look at that askance. I don't know. Again, not a lawyer. We'll see. I shouldn't make any predictions. Having said that, in some ways, it may not matter to Trump whether he actually wins the case. He has demonstrated a willingness to use the courts in order and to use the process in order to make people's lives miserable. That's, in fact, something he has said out loud. He, long time ago, as a business person, sued my former colleague from the New York Times, Tim O'Brien, because Tim O'Brien wrote a book in which he dared to say that Trump wasn't as rich as Trump said he was. That was the essence of Trump's lawsuit against him. How dare you say I'm not as rich as I really am? And this lawsuit didn't actually succeed at all. But Trump later said it didn't matter that it didn't succeed to him because I made his life miserable, meaning Tim O'Brien's life miserable. And that is, in fact, clearly it would seem a goal of his is to whether he succeeds in getting conviction or not, whether he succeeds in putting somebody in prison or not. These people who are charged or investigated have to spend money on legal fees. It makes getting a job pretty darn hard. And obviously you sit there for months, if not years, worrying about, what the outcome might be.
Yeah, it's all about the cruelty, right? My last question is about Epstein. Did you get a chance to listen to what Lutnick said yesterday? I think it was yesterday on a podcast.
I saw that he said it. I haven't actually listened to it, but yeah, that seemed to not be the official talking points of the administration.
Yeah, I mean, first he said that he was at the mansion in the city. He saw the massage tables. And this is a bombshell, in my opinion. He says that he was told that the massages were all videotaped, and that's how Epstein got the sweetheart deal, because Epstein traded the tapes to the people in charge. I mean, my God, not only is that
blackmailer ever or something like that.
Not only is that just astonishing as a factoid, right? But it completely contradicts what his boss has been saying and what the administration has been saying. So I hope this thing doesn't die over the weekend. It seems like it's going to be interesting how this plays out, because it not only lends credence to all the charges, but you got to wonder what Trump is thinking when he's sitting there munching on a cheeseburger going, what the hell? Right.
It certainly adds fuel to fire. And I would imagine it encourages the Republicans in the House who are working with Democrats to actually have this discharge petition on their resolution that they want to pass, calling for papers to be released and all that. You're right. I can't imagine Trump thought that was a really great interview. At the same time, Trump is odd on this. Like, he sat next to Elon Musk at the Charlie Kirk funeral, even though Musk is the one who said publicly that, oh my gosh, the Epstein files, this is what this is all about. I mean, Musk himself was out there promoting this when he was mad at Trump and they had their breakup for however long that's lasted. So Trump is an odd character in that regard, because he's willing to sort of welcome back into the fold people who you wouldn't think would ever be welcomed back in. But yeah, Lutnick, I can't imagine it's a good week for him in the Oval Office.
You and I could spend the next 50 years in psychology studies and still not be equipped to analyze the psychosis of the Trump-Musk relationship. Peter, thanks so much for coming on. This was a great conversation, and I look forward to next time.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good talking to you.
All righty, take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.